Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Ryan here from Gameessays, back with another tier list. Did you guys miss these? It's been a little bit. Let me know. Anyway, we are looking at Zelda games and their dungeon lineup. So we're saying which Zelda game had the best lineup of dungeons. So even if you may think something like the Stone Tower Temple is the best dungeon in all of Zelda, is all of the dungeons, the dungeon lineup rather, for Majora's Mask, is that the best dungeon lineup in all of Zelda? That's what we're here to answer today. We're ranking each game S through D, and we also have that little dungeons question mark if we're kind of like, maybe this game doesn't apply or the dungeons are a little weird because of how the game is structured. So that's why that category exists. So which Zelda game has the strongest dungeon lineup? Let's get started. We're going to start with the original Legend of Zelda. The original Legend of Zelda, we had levels 1 through 9. They were all based on symbols. You had stuff like the eagle, the moon, the snake, and then the final dungeon was Death Mountain. Right now, I am putting it in a C tier because obviously there's a lot of room for improvement with Zelda dungeons in the original game. We basically just upped the ante in terms of layout and the stronger enemies, but in terms of things like puzzles, it didn't really get any more interesting as you went on. It was just more annoying enemies and more obscure layouts and more walls that you had no idea if you could bomb them or not to make it through. So because of the simplicity of the puzzles and how they increased difficulty, it made things a little bit less fun towards the end of the game because it was really just like they threw more BS as opposed to making it a more interesting and compelling experience. Now, at the time, it was great, but we've obviously come a long way from the original Legend of Zelda dungeons. I still think they hold up fine, but they can be a little annoying and obscure. Let's talk about the Wind Waker. Wind Waker, I think, perfectly just sits in the B tier. We have stuff like the Forsaken Fortress, we have the Dragon Roost Cavern, you have the Forbidden Woods, you have the Earth Temple, you have the Wind Temple, Tower of the Gods, Ganon's Tower. No bad dungeons, but I would say no great dungeons either. That's just how it is with the Wind Waker. There's a lot about the Wind Waker I like, but I don't think the dungeons are a strong element for that game, and I think they sit comfortably in the B tier. Hyrule Warriors, dungeons, question mark? I think you go into the Water Temple in one of the missions, but yeah, not really traditional Zelda dungeons here, so I'm just gonna leave it there. Same with Four Swords Adventures. I knew it does have some dungeons, like I think there's like a Dark Palace and things like that. But again, it's very non-traditional, and we might as well throw Four Swords in there. And then where's Triforce Heroes? That's basically where the dungeons question mark is going to sit with that. Okay, we're going to talk about Phantom Hourglass. Phantom Hourglass I'm going to put as a C tier as well. There's some good dungeons in here. In particular, I think the Ghost Ship is a nice, like, interesting, different feeling dungeon that the game I thought really needed. And I also say, I talk about this dungeon all the time, but the Temple of Ice is one of the most underrated dungeons in all of Zelda. Other than that, nothing really blows me away. Temple of the Ocean King, I don't hate it as much as other people do. It has some interesting ideas. They tried something new. But at the end of the day, I'm not gonna want to play that dungeon over anything that's gonna go above it on this tier list. So I think Phantom Hourglass at a C tier is fine. And we're gonna throw Spirit Tracks in the C tier as well, because I don't remember dungeons being that amazing. I remember not really liking the Spirit Tower. I know they tried to do something different than Phantom Hourglass where you didn't have to replay sections, but I almost think stuff that was in the Spirit Tower was more annoying than what you had to do in Phantom Hourglass. The other dungeons I don't have a strong memory of. This is one game where it's been a very long time since I played it, so let me know if I'm wrong on this one, but I just don't remember the dungeons being any more amazing. Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild, I mean, it's just gonna get a D tier for dungeons because, I mean, hey, we've all had this conversation a million times. Breath of the Wild's a fantastic game, but dungeons just are not on the same caliber. You could look at the shrines as dungeon replacements, but I'm not really looking at that. I'm more thinking about the divine beasts, and I'm thinking about Hyrule Castle, which is, it's cool, but again, the whole dungeon element of Zelda is what's sorely missed in this game, and that's okay. I appreciate what it did, but on this tier list, it's just gonna be a D. That's just how it is. But let's rate something. Let's pick something that is going to get a high rating, and that is going to be Skyward Sword. Skyward Sword for me is going to get an A for dungeons. We look at the catalog of dungeons, which I got my little guide here just in case I forget. Skyview Temple, take it or leave it. But I do think Earth Temple, you've got Lanayru Mining Facility, Cistern, Sandship, Fire Sanctuaries, and then Sky Keep. But I think with the Earth Temple, the Mining Facility, Cistern, Sandship, Sky Keep, it's a very, very strong lineup. It's like almost S tier for me, but Fire Sanctuary and Skyview are definitely on the weaker side. But I mean, it's damn good. And the thing is, some of the dungeons are a little too short. I don't know. I'm gonna stick with A for now, but a case could even potentially be made for an S for this game. Adventure Link, we're going to go in the D tier as well. You have 7 palaces in that game. And the thing is, I defend Adventure Link for a lot of things. But the side-scrolling palaces, especially after like the second one, they get more and more complex. And they're way more annoying to navigate than even the original Legend of Zelda. And the original Legend of Zelda is like Death Mountain is like crazy confusing and all that. But I don't think it holds a candle to how confusing the Great Palace is, and if you don't know where to go in the Great Palace, it's like an impossible nightmare. I just think navigating side-scrolling dungeons, it's way more difficult to like get your bearings and remember where you are and how far you have to go. It just doesn't really work. There's some things that I really love about Zelda 2, but I think side-scrolling sections, I like how they handled it in Game Boy Color games where you throw in a couple side-scrolling sections, but for a whole dungeon to be side-scrolling, I just don't think it works as well as the top-down kind of grid block-based dungeons. I feel like that's just easier for you to keep track of where you are, where you need to be, where side-scrolling stuff with the elevators, it just gets really, really annoying, and you just give up and use maps. That's how I make it through Zelda 2. Like I said, I will defend a lot of things about Zelda 2, but I think the side-scrolling palaces, especially later in the game, it's not its strong suit at all. A Link Between Worlds, man, I am gonna just shoot up into the S tier. I love this game. It has some of the most fun 2D dungeons. I think it might just be the definitive 2D Zelda experience. I really, really do love Link Between Worlds and the whole wall mechanic. The only complaint I probably have about A Link Between Worlds in its dungeons specifically is that because you have the wall mechanic where you become 2D and go into the wall and solve puzzles, because that's a central mechanic that's used in every dungeon, the aesthetics of the dungeons have to be a little bit uglier because you need the correct walls for you to be able to go into them for puzzles and stuff. So that's my only complaint, and that is a super minor complaint because I think the dungeons in this game are fantastic and it definitely deserves to be in the S tier. The Minishcap. Minishcap I'm going to go ahead and put at B tier. I think it really does sit very well with where the Wind Waker is because I don't think there's any bad dungeons in the game, but there's no dungeon where I'm like, this is the most amazing Zelda dungeon. I think they're just solid. Like, Minishcap is just a very solid game. It has solid dungeons. There's no bad dungeons. There's no incredible dungeons. People might like Temple of Droplets or the Wind Palace. Both of those, I think they're all good. But there's none where I'm like, that is my all-time favorite dungeon. And that's why I think it will sit right at the B tier, and I think that's just a great spot for it. Oracle of Seasons, if you guys have seen my Oracle of Seasons review, this game's pretty fresh in my mind. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. Spent a lot of time on that one, but I'm gonna put Oracle of Seasons at the C tier. I would probably say it is the strongest. I'm putting it all the way to the left because I would say it's like a C+, whereas, maybe the original Legend of Zelda is like, or just a C or a C-. Oracle of Seasons, it has some good dungeons. Again, I don't think there's any dungeon where I'm like, this is a straight up bad dungeon. But my biggest complaints are that for a Game Boy Color game with top-down platforming just doesn't work that well. When you're trying to be precise and just the controls of how Game Boy Color Zelda is, trying to do some of these like top-down platforming with like your Pegasus seeds and things like that, it just gets really slippery and you can't be precise. It's not like tight controls like a Mario platforming, right? So it just doesn't really work that well. This is supposed to be the more action combat focused game of the Zelda series. Of the Oracle series rather. And it just doesn't translate to Game Boy Color as well as the more puzzle heavy Ages does. And yeah, so it's a lot of combat and it's a lot of like sprawling layouts and there's a lot of like platforming moments that can be a little annoying, and the last few dungeons are a slog. But there's a lot of good stuff here too. I don't want to sell the dungeons in this game short. There's some really great, compelling stuff in these dungeons. It's just some of the sections can be super annoying, but overall I think it's solid. It's just not my preferred style of dungeon, especially for a Game Boy Color game. So for Ages, I'm gonna actually go B tier, and for this, the dungeons are more puzzle-based, which just suits the Game Boy Color so much better. It's like it was designed to be that way. Still, some of these dungeons are super annoying, like, just to name a few here, stuff like Jabu Jabu's Belly and the Mermaid Cave can be really, really annoying, and I think even the Ancient Tomb. So the last few dungeons are like a huge slog, so I feel like that brings it down for me. Like, I know recently playing Seasons, like, it was taking me over 2 hours to beat some of these dungeons, which is quite a long time to be spent in the same Zelda dungeon. So yeah, there's a lot of great stuff going on here, but it also maybe gets a little too complex towards the end of the game, and I think that has to bring it down a little bit. Link's Awakening. Link's Awakening, I'm probably going to put in the B tier as well. I'm not crazy about Link's Awakening dungeons. I know a lot of people really love them. I haven't played the Switch remake yet, so maybe my opinion will change. But yeah, I'm looking more at like Wind Waker and Minishcap being more towards like a B+, and maybe Link's Awakening and Ages being more of like a B-. Just because I'm just not I'm not big on the Game Boy Color dungeons. I seem to have a lot of trouble with them, and I spend hours and hours in these dungeons, as I've already explained. So I think putting them at kind of a low B is where I'm most comfortable. Majora's Mask. What do we do with good old Majora's Mask? What do we do with it? So, when we think about Majora's Mask, we have Woodfall Temple, we have Snowhead Temple, we have Great Bay Temple, and we have the Stone Tower Temple. I want to say... I'm probably going to put Majora's Mask as a high B. And yeah, I put it above Wind Waker and Minishcap because I do think that Stone Tower Temple is just one of those dungeons where you're like, it's incredible. But so Woodfall Temple I think is fine. It's a good intro dungeon, perfectly serviceable for what it is. Snowhead and Great Bay is where I start to have some issues. Like, Snowhead can be very annoying with, it's such a vertical dungeon that it's very easy to fall and things like that. I've liked it a little bit more as I replayed it, same with Great Bay, but they're dungeons I'm not like in love with. It's like, I like Woodfall, the next two are just like okay for me, and then Stone Tower Temple is amazing. So I feel like B tier, and also we just gotta say there's only 4 dungeons. You know, the moon is not really even a dungeon either, so I feel like it's just gonna go B tier. I mean, it's not what Majora's Mask is truly about anyway, so I think being at high B tier is fair. Link to the Past. I'm gonna put A Link to the Past at A tier. A lot of people might think this is like blasphemy, that Link to the Past is S tier dungeons. I like A Link to the Past dungeons. They're very combat heavy. They're kind of similar to like Oracle of Seasons dungeons, actually, now that I think about it. Where there's, you know, Link's Awakening is what really brought in the super puzzle heavy dungeons, and, you know, we see the 3D games adopt a lot of the puzzle stuff too. Whereas A Link to the Past is very much similar to, you know, the original Zelda, where, you know, there's some like block puzzles and things like that, but for the most part, there's not like a crazy amount of puzzles in the dungeons, and it's a lot more action based and things like that. But I do like the dungeons in the game. I think Link Between Worlds is just like the freshest, most best version of dungeons for 2D space. That's, I think, A Link Between Worlds really capture that well for me, and I like the dungeons more in A Link Between Worlds than I do in A Link to the Past. But Link to the Past has quite a catalog. I mean, I think there's like 12 dungeons in A Link to the Past. What we have, like Hyrule Castle at the beginning, you got Eastern Palace, Desert Palace, Tower of Hyrule, Hyrule Castle again, Dark Palace, Swamp Palace, Skullwoods, Gargoyles Domain, Ice Palace, Misery Mire, Turtle Rock, Ganon's Tower. It's a stacked lineup. There's a lot going on there. And yeah, that's, I think A tier is pretty fair for that. Ocarina of Time, you know, you already know, S tier. And even though like something like Dodongo's Cavern is kind of like meh for me, I don't mind Jabu Jabu's Belly, but it's not that crazy. I think Deku Tree is the best intro dungeon probably in all of Zelda. And then, you know, Forest, Fire, Water, Spirit, Shadow are all just bangers. I think they're all either really good to great dungeons, and it is an incredibly strong dungeon catalog. I think it's hard to argue. You know, you can argue about the child dungeons, but it's hard to argue that the adult dungeons aren't all really good dungeons. And then lastly, we have Twilight Princess, and that's just gonna be a C tier for me for Twilight Princess. I mean, the dungeons they just don't stack up with Ocarina of Time. You know, I think Twilight Princess, it tries to be Ocarina of Time, and I'm just kidding, guys. It's S tier. Don't worry. I know you guys think I hate Twilight Princess. Twilight Princess dungeons are S tier. It is probably one of the strongest catalogs of dungeons in all of Zelda. Of course, that's why it's at S tier. It's just amazing. I like the Goron Mines. I think Lake Bed's a strong dungeon. What is it? Arbiter's Grounds. Spooky, awesome, really great lore behind it. Super cool dungeon. Then we have Snow Peak Ruins, which might be potentially my favorite dungeon in all of Zelda. I can't really think of one that I like more besides maybe the Forest Temple in Ocarina of Time. It's amazing. And then even City in the Sky. A lot of people don't like City in the Sky. I actually like City in the Sky, and I don't mind Temple of Time either. Temple of Time might be like the weakest post Master Sword dungeon for me in the game. But Twilight Princess, there's things I don't like about Twilight Princess, but dungeons is not one of those things. The Forest Temple's like okay in this game, but I think everything else, it might have the strongest lineup. So for now, here you go. You guys satisfied? Look, it's all the way at the top of S for you guys, so you feel better. Because I feel like you guys think I always crap on Twilight Princess, but there you go. Twilight Princess S tier dungeon lineup. So let me know what you guys think. Do you guys agree or disagree with these dungeon lineups? I feel like Skyward Sword might be able to move a little bit, potentially. Not sure, but I'm comfortable with where this is. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.